Grant Baldwin is back in the house. Speakerslab.com. Is that right?
The Speaker Lab,
The
singular.
Speaker Lab. I got too many windows open. The speakerlab.com. You were here 3 years ago, man, right before the world came crashing down. Welcome back to the Sales Podcast. How the heck are you?
Well, the world has calmed down significantly. Well, in some
Has
ways
it?
and a mess in other ways, but nonetheless, man, it's good to be back.
Has it really calmed down, or are we becoming crazy and we're just getting used to it?
It is possible. It is possible. I mean, we were talking before we started recording here 3 years ago, and we're recording this mid-February or so, and just thinking through, like, I'm hearing about this thing going on in Europe or China. Like, that's not going to get here. Nah, that's not going to get here. Like, we're in America. Like, we're invincible. And pretty quickly, like, oh man, I think it's going to be here for a minute.
Dude, so how did you transition through that? Like, what? I mean, everything shut down, right? I mean, there was no, people weren't traveling. They weren't doing live events. People took a long time to get back to even doing live events. So like, what'd you do?
Yeah. So for some context for the listeners, I run a training company called the Speak Lab, where we teach people the business of speaking. How do you find and book paid speaking gigs? And so, when the world closes down, I remember, March, April, May were pretty just dark, scary. You're like, man, I don't, nobody's booking speakers. Nobody's thinking about this. You're just trying to think about, are we going to survive this, and what's this going to look like? So yeah, it was definitely a very, very difficult stretch. What ended up happening though, is, this sounds weird, but I think that the pandemic is actually one of the best possible things to happen to the speaking industry. And here's what I mean by that is, prior to the pandemic, virtual was never really much of a thing. Event planners didn't take it seriously, speakers didn't take it seriously, and it just wasn't really a viable option. Well, then the pandemic comes, and virtual speaking becomes the only option. It's the only game in town, and all of a sudden everybody leans into it. And so we quickly leaned into that as well. We were teaching and training on virtual speaking. We had one of our coaches who was doing a lot of virtual speaking, getting booked a lot, getting paid very, very well for virtual. And at the time, it's just kind of the wild, wild west. And so we try to be an authority and a leader in that space to show, no, the speaking industry will exist and can continue to exist. We're going to show you how to do it. And so we had some good success leaning into virtual speaking. The nice thing is that, we fast forward here a couple of years, and even though the pandemic is, maybe behind us, who knows, maybe it's here forever, but things have certainly settled back to some sense of normalcy. That in-person events have certainly come back, and have come back with a vengeance, but they're not coming back in replacement of virtual, but they're coming back in addition to virtual. So today we're seeing a lot of in-person, we're seeing a lot of virtual, we're seeing a lot of hybrid. It's created a lot of opportunities and speaking events that did not happen prior to the pandemic. So if anything, I would say that, again, this is an amazing, amazing time for speakers to be able to get booked and paid to speak.
What should somebody shoot for? Should they shoot for virtual to cut their teeth? Should they go for the live? Should they make a bunch of, just go live on their own to have a body of work? Like, how does somebody cut their teeth?
Yeah. So one thing that's important to note is there's not necessarily, especially early on for speakers, there's not like a in-person event planners and virtual event planners. It's not really a distinction. They're just event planners, right? Meaning that they may be looking for something that's virtual, that happens to be virtual. They may be looking for something that happens to be in person. There's a lot of opportunities that exist in both spheres. There's a lot of opportunities that exist as a kind of a hybrid as well. But one of the things that we see today is that the speakers who are doing really well are speakers that are able to offer and do both. And this is for a couple of reasons. One is that before the pandemic, it was very common that maybe you would go speak and you'd collect a check, and that was kind of the end of the transaction. Now, one of the things that we're seeing is, think about like whenever you're out in California, you go to an In-N-Out burger. And so you can get the burger, or you can get, would you like fries with that? Would you like a milkshake? Would you like to upsize that? And so the same thing is happening in the speaking world, where maybe you go speak, but then it's, hey, can you, for the next 6 months, what if you did a virtual Zoom once a month to help implement and apply what you talked about in your presentation or in your keynote? So it's able for speakers are now able to kind of combine, maybe I do something in person and then I do something virtual with the same audience or client at a later your point, to go deeper with them, but also increase the amount that a speaker may be able to charge. So it's created significant amount of opportunities for that. So also it's important for speakers to be able to do both, because there's still a lot of unknowns in the world. And so event planners have been very traumatized from 3 years ago with the pandemic. And so they like to know, okay, worst case scenario, we get, a week out from the event and something happens in the world and we can't do it in person and we need to go virtual. An event planner wants to know that you are capable as a speaker of being able to do that. So as a speaker, it's important to remain versatile and flexible with that, and have some of that flexibility. Now, I will say there's certainly pros and cons with virtual versus in person. We're both virtual right now, and so it's better than nothing, but it's definitely not the same thing as us being in the same room together. So there's nothing that's ever going to compare to hugs and high fives and handshakes and just being together with other people. Just the energy that the experiences with that, with all the people being in the same room together. From a virtual standpoint, though, it's great from a sense of, you're in California, I'm in Nashville, we can be across the world and still be able to connect. You can have, there are speakers that, especially during the first few months of the pandemic, that might do 7 events in 3 days in 2 different countries and 5 different states and never leave their house. So from that standpoint, it's awesome, right? So, but the virtual thing, we're all, Zoom fatigue, we've talked about before, is it certainly a real thing, and you're never going to have that the true real in-person experience. It's hard to compete with that via Zoom. So again, pros and cons, but it's good for the nutshell of it is it's good for a speaker to have both of them in their arsenal.
Yeah. I like that hybrid model and the ongoing, and maybe you can slap some sense into me, or maybe reassure me that I'm not totally crazy. But like I've always been torn on speaking, because it's like, how do you really make an impact, right? Even Zig Ziglar talked about back in the day. He's like, he was there to speak, to motivate you to buy his cassettes, right? So you could listen to them, Automobile University, so you can listen over and over and over again and truly have the learning sink in, right? Because we're not going to move the needle very much for many people in a 1-hour talk. But it's like, I don't want to think, sometimes I feel like there's an ulterior motive, like I'm dirty, right? I'm like, I'm speaking, but really I want you to buy additional stuff when we're done. But it's like, I do want them to buy additional stuff because it's good for them.
Yeah.
So I like the ongoing, even my own sales training. I rarely will do just training. It's like, we've got to do some type of 2-month, 3-month, 6-month ongoing you don't learn anything in an hour.
Yeah.
Right. The best you can do is light a spark, so how am I crazy? How can I give a talk and drive them to invest in themselves afterwards and not feel like it's a bait and switch? Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Well, I don't necessarily think it has to be an either or. I think it can certainly be a both and what I mean by that is, you and I and every single viewer or listener, if we had to think about speakers who have impacted us, and maybe we don't even remember what the talk was about, but they said something. There was one line that really stuck with us, that resonated with us, that clicked, and really had a profound impact on us. I can think of a couple of ones. I'll give you one quick example. So years ago, this is probably 18 years ago or so, my wife and I was a youth pastor at a church, and parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like. One thing I really enjoyed was speaking, and I felt like I was decent at speaking, wanted to do more of it, but just wasn't really sure, how do you find gigs? How does this world work? A lot of the same stuff that we teach today at the Speaker Lab. And so I was actually attending a youth pastor conference, and at the time, my wife and I were discussing whether or not, do we want to do this? Should I pursue speaking? And we're just kind of going back and forth. My wife was pregnant with our first child, and Wes, as you know, like nothing like bringing a kid in the world that just causes you to question everything about life. And so we were just kind of asking some big questions at the time. So I remember I was at this youth pastor conference. At the time, we were living in Missouri. This conference happens to be in Nashville, where I live now. and was sitting in a session. I don't remember who the speaker was. I don't remember what the session was about, but he said this one line that just resonated and stuck with me, and that would mean nothing out of context now, but enough so that I vividly remember leaving that session, calling my wife saying, hey, I think I need to go all in on this speaking thing. And I came back from that conference. I quit my job. And a couple months later, like really started pursuing the speaking thing. And fast forward, and I've been in the speaking industry to this day. And a part of it was a line that a speaker said in a conference that was probably a throwaway line. Again, I don't even remember who the speaker was, but it had a huge, huge impact on the trajectory of my life. And so in some ways, like I didn't buy anything from him. I don't remember his name. I don't remember purchasing a book or having a follow-up conversation with him, but there was one thing that he said that really impacted me. And I think we could all share stories like that, where a speaker and something that they shared in a talk and a workshop and a message or something, maybe it was in person, maybe something we heard, maybe something we read, but that speaker communicated something that had a big impact. So that can certainly happen. Now, to your point, Wes, it's certainly valuable to go deeper on certain things. So that's a big thing that we do at the Speaker Lab. So we've got a podcast with 400 plus episodes that are free episodes. People can go listen to all of them. We have people that do that, just binge all the way through. But if you want to go deeper, then here's some other opportunities where you can go deeper with us, right? So I don't necessarily think that it's one or the other. I think it can be both and.
Yeah, cool. So you got some cool resources on your site. I'm looking here now. Find out how much you should charge. Learn the 7 steps of booking more paid speaking gigs. Get free live training on how to get booked and paid to speak. Let's talk about the pricing.
Mm-hmm.
I've, speaking to Zig Ziglar, right? Back when he was towards the end of his life, and he was still getting after it, but not as much. But he was $100,000, $120,000.
Yep.
Jocko Willink is, 100,000 plus. I've heard not very good guys at not very large conferences getting paid $21,000. I was like, what is going on?
Yep.
And then others are like, oh, I'm doing it for free and I can't even get booked. I mean, how do people figure this out?
Yep. So there's a lot in there that we can unpack. So I'll go a couple different directions. So one is going to be, let's first start by talking about what goes into speaking fees. Okay. So there's going to be a variety of factors, and speaking fees is much more of an art than a science. And so you alluded to a free tool that we've got on our website. If people want to go to myspeakerfee.com, it's totally free. You answer something like 10 questions or so, multiple choice questions. It'll spit out a number. It's not an exact science again, but it gets you in the ballpark there. So if you're like, I have zero clue, check out myspeakerfee.com. Now, what goes into myspeakerfee.com in that calculation? One is going to be your industry. You can charge more in some industries versus others. You can charge more speaking to corporations versus nonprofits. You can charge more speaking to colleges versus elementary schools. It's not that one's better or worse than the other. It's just that each pond is going to be slightly different and have different fee ranges that they are used to. So that's a factor. Another factor is going to be your marketing assets. So specifically your website, your demo video, like whether we like it or not, people judge books by their cover. And so you want to make sure that your stuff looks sharp. It looks professional, because an event planner is not choosing you as a speaker in isolation. They're not picking you in a vacuum. They're looking at you and 2 or 3 or 4 dozen other speakers who might be a fit. And so if they're looking at other speaker websites and demo videos, then you want to make sure that your stuff looks on par relative to your competition. So that's important. Another variable and factor is going to be your experience, meaning if you're a brand new speaker just getting started, you probably won't be able to charge as much as someone who's been doing this for 10 or 20 years and is frankly just a better speaker. So that's going to be a factor. But again, there's a lot of variables and factors there. Go to myspeakerfee.com. That'll give you like a shortcut answer there. Now, you're also going to have, Wes, what you alluded to, some of the extremes, the 50,000, the 100,000 plus type speakers. At that stage, you're largely getting into a celebrity factor where they're bringing someone in, not necessarily for what they're going to talk about, even though a Jocko or Zig could be phenomenal speakers. They're in part bringing that person in because they're going to be able to sell tickets. And so people who are on the fence of like, should I attend this conference? Should I attend this event? I don't know. Oh, Jocko's going to be there. Zig was going to be there. Whoever's going to be there. Then like, oh, heck yeah, I'm in. Sign me up. I'm willing to buy a ticket because that person's going to be there. So I heard it said one time that your fee is in direct proportion to what it costs someone to explain who you are to their boss. Okay. And here's what I mean by that. So let's say an event planner is going to their boss and saying, okay, I'm thinking about hiring this guy, Grant. Let me tell you about Grant. So Grant, he runs the Speaker Lab and he does this and he has a book. And the longer it takes for them to explain who I am, my fee drops. Versus if they come in and say, hey, I'd like to hire a speaker. I'd like to hire Oprah. Period. Full stop. Like that's it. That means her fee is going to be astronomically high, right? Now, this is just, again, kind of a joking tongue-in-cheek way of thinking about it. But the celebrity factor is a really, really big deal. Because if you think about, let's take someone like a former president. Okay, let's take an Obama. And some organization or group may pay Obama $1 million to come speak. And on one hand, you're like, that's crazy. But if because Obama's on the docket, they're going to sell $5 million worth of tickets, that's a good ROI. So it really just kind of depends on some celebrity factors there. Now, let's go back to one other thing you mentioned there on speaking for free. Okay. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Should you do that? My summary answer would be speaking for free is okay as long as you know why you're doing it. Don't just do this for the goodness out of your heart. Okay. Meaning like you are running a business and you have to treat this as a business. So as a speaker, you are providing something of value. You have to receive something of value in exchange. Now, the thing that you receive in exchange can look a lot of different ways that do not show up on a paycheck. So let me give you some examples. Let's say that you have some type of product or service that you offer, and maybe speaking at something creates some lead gen opportunities for you that generates, significant business for you. Well, maybe you didn't get a dime from the event planner, but it led to thousands or tens of thousands of dollars worth of business. That's worth something, right? Let's say, for example, you're a new speaker and you're trying to develop a good demo video or website. Maybe you go speak, and because you spoke, it's at a cool venue and you got really good footage and you got really good pictures and they had a photographer and videographer and you got those assets for free, right? That's worth something. Let's say you go speak at something and not because the event planner told you, but that there are other event planners in that room that are looking to hire a speaker like you. You go speak at something and it leads to other events. That's worth something, right? Another one would be travel. I'll tell you a quick story. I had a friend a couple of years ago who was invited to speak at something in Spain, and he doesn't really speak much. And he's like, I don't know if I want to fly all the way over to Spain and do this. And their budget was a little limited. And I said, how do we turn this into a European vacation? And so basically what he negotiated was for them to pay for him and his wife to come over. They're going to pay for several additional nights of hotel. And so even though the fee was less than he would have liked, he was able to get a week's vacation in Spain out of it. That's something of value to him, right? So it's not always the black and white of I got a check or I didn't get a check. Like sometimes there are ways that you can receive value that don't show up in that. So I do not just completely dismiss that like speaking for free is always bad, evil, you should never do it. It can make sense. But again, as a speaker, you got to be clear on when it makes sense for you.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I did that I spoke in Slovenia and the fee wasn't great, but my son was studying in London. Mm-hmm. So, I made a trip out of it, and, so they paid for the travel, the connecting flights, and I got some great footage, great venue. So, we made the best of it. Yeah. If my son wasn't there, I probably wouldn't have gone, but totally. It worked out. And
absolutely. Yeah. Just be clear on like what makes sense for you, because what makes sense for you may not make sense for someone else. So sure. That's why, again, you got to be really, really clear on what the win is for you.
So do you help speakers at all levels? I mean, somebody that's never been paid to speak up to veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. So on one end of the spectrum, a lot of the speakers we work with are newer speakers, and they're trying to figure out like, I don't know what I don't know. And I'm just getting started. I'm trying to get clarity on who do I speak to? What do I speak about? What problem do I solve? Is this even a thing that people hire speakers to talk about? Just because you say, hey, I'm really passionate about, underwater basket weaving, it doesn't mean that anybody cares. And certainly that anybody actually hires speakers to talk about that. So we help kind of navigate that. When we touched on earlier, your website, your demo video, And some of our programs, we actually create those for speakers. And so we just say, hey, you need to have these. We're going to make them for you, remove some of that guesswork. So we definitely work with those speakers on that end of the spectrum who are brand new. Maybe they've never really spoke. Maybe they've been paid a time or two. Maybe they've had some stuff that's fallen in their lap before, some word of mouth, some referral stuff. And they're like, dang, speaking's fun. I want to do more of it, but I don't want to just sit around waiting for someone to magically find out about me. So how do I proactively treat this like a business? So we have a lot of those speakers. We also have we have a new program for speakers that are kind of on the other end who are going, okay, I'm doing a lot of speaking. I'm doing, let's say 30, 40 gigs a year. I'm making 6 figures or more from speaking. I'm trying to think through things like hiring. Should I hire someone? What do I hire them to do? I'm trying to think through things like cash flow, taxes, finances as important issues. I'm trying to think through things like not wanting to get on a plane all the time. And so how do I go deeper with certain clients? How do I take my core message, my signature talk, and turn it into other different types of products or services, whether that's a book or a course or coaching or consulting, and they're just trying to figure out how do you navigate that. So yeah, we work with speakers on both ends of the spectrum.
So you mentioned that signature talk. Is that the best way forward? Like have that core story and just tweak it a little bit, maybe for the event, but like not reinvent yourself for every single talk?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Here's a couple ways to think about this. One is that I think a big mistake a lot of new speakers make is they feel like every time they speak, they have to do a new talk. And a way to think about this is let's imagine Wes, you and I go to lunch and we sit down at a restaurant and the waiter walks up and says, hey, welcome to the restaurant. What would you like to eat? We say, well, we'd love to see a menu. They say, well, we don't have menus. We can cook anything you want. What would you like? That sounds like a horrible idea, right? And so the same thing is true for speakers. Like, what do you want me to talk about? I can talk about anything. Like, no, don't do that. So be really, really clear about here are the 2 or 3 topics or talks that you have, and it's not 10, like 2 or 3. I'd rather you have like one amazing killer talk versus 10 mediocre half-baked talks. So the best speakers on the planet, they don't have like dozens and dozens of talks. They've got like 1 or 2 things that they do, and they're just really, really good at those things. Now, what happens is this is also assuming that you're speaking to different audiences on a regular basis, right? So if you go back to a client a couple years later, and maybe it's a different audience, or maybe it's some same audience, maybe there's some things that you've tweaked and you've updated some stories and that sort of thing. But the idea of, I speak today to client A and I speak tomorrow to client B, so therefore I have to have 2 totally different talks. You don't do that. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is that when you're creating a talk from scratch, you're making an educated guess. I think this is funny. I think this will make sense. I think this will resonate. I think this will click. But you don't know. You don't know until you get up in front of the audience. And one of the cool things about speaking is when you speak, you get that real-time feedback of if people are with you or if they're not. Are they engaged? Are they tracking? Is this making sense? Are they nodding? Are they smiling? Are they taking notes? Are they asleep? Are they on their phone? You get that real-time feedback. And so each time you get that feedback, you make tweaks and adjustments to your talk, and it makes the talk better over time. So if I give a talk today and I give that same talk tomorrow, tomorrow's going to be better because I got feedback from today's audience. So whenever a speaker is giving a talk that they've given hundreds and hundreds of times, that talk is really, really dialed in because they've got that feedback from previous audiences. So that's also really, really important to remember there. One other note I was going to say is think about this like comedians. Like comedians, sometimes people assume like, oh, they're just naturally funny and they just scribble some ideas on a napkin and hop up there and it just works out. Like it doesn't. Like they have a concept, they have an idea, and I'm going to get up on stage, I'm going to try something, and some of it's going to work, some of it's not. But each time I do it, it's going to get better. And so think about this like from a chef perspective. A chef is going, all right, I have this idea of a dish. I want to make this pasta dish with the seafood pasta dish. And so I have an idea of what should go in it, but they don't know. They're making an educated guess. I'm going to make all of this. I'm going to put it together. I'm going to taste it as I go. We need to cook it a little bit more. It's a little too tart, or it needs some more salt. We overcooked it. They don't know, but each time they make it, it becomes better. So eventually it becomes this signature dish for a restaurant where they've made that dish thousands of times and it is perfect. And don't mess with it. Don't tweak it. This is the way that dish should be made. And your talk over time becomes the same thing. Now, if you've been giving that talk for hundreds and hundreds of times and like you personally are just kind of bored, it's okay if like you tweak some things. Think about it like a band, a band will, or a musician, like a lot of times they'll release a new album every 2-3 years or so. And it's some new stuff. They also maybe do some old stuff, but it's something kind of fresh to stay top of mind with, with the audience or with clients that a speaker may be working with. So yeah, that's a whole bunch of ideas there.
Yeah. So obviously when it's a celebrity, like Gary Vaynerchuk, Jocko, right? There isn't even a title, right? It's not like Jocko is going to give the 7 steps to being tough.
Yep.
It's just the keynote speaker is Jocko.
Yep.
Right. But for those of us that aren't Jocko, I mean, we need that, like the 7 deadly sins of selling or the 5 proven steps to make every sale, or, I mean, it's got to be flushed out and outlined, right? To give to that event planner, to give to their attendees.
Mm-hmm.
Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. Where I remember at a conference a couple of years ago, and they had Richard Branson speak. And I was like, I don't care what Richard's talking about. It's Richard Branson. I'm going to show up in the room and be front and center. And so, yeah, there's absolutely, again, that's that celebrity draw where it's like, it doesn't matter what they're talking about. Like, I want to be there and hear what they have to say. So that's certainly a thing. Whenever it comes to your title, I think in some ways titles it's easy for speakers to over-index on them. And some of this depends on the context of where you're speaking. Okay. So there's a difference between an audience that wants to be there and an audience that has to be there. Okay. So let's say you are speaking at some type of corporate training and HR is mandated that, the entire department has to be there. Like, it really doesn't matter what your talk is. They got to be there either way. So it doesn't matter what the title is or any of that stuff. They got to be there. Versus where I think titles do matter is if it's an optional presentation or if you're doing a session concurrently with other sessions. So if someone's looking at a conference schedule and I've got to go to your session, or here's 4 other choices, the title really matters. But if it's just kind of you're a keynote speaker and everybody's coming to that session, it matters, but it also doesn't matter, type thing. So, spend some effort, spend some energy on it, but again, depending on the context, it may not matter that much.
But the event planner, they're running these concurrent sessions. They need to know what you're talking about, right? So they need to see that title. Yeah.
And again, a lot of that stuff is stuff that you would most likely have discussed and covered with them ahead of time. And so the kind of think about like a movie, the title to a movie and the plot of the movie, maybe 2 different things. And like the title doesn't necessarily, tell you anything. It's like that generic title of like Reach for the Stars. And it's like, well, is this about astronomy or is this about motivation or is this, I don't know, is this about stretching? So it could be any number of things. So there's certainly like titles that like are just kind of vague and don't tell a ton, but an event planner, if you would have already met with them, discussed them, like, okay, I understand the audience and here's what, this workshop or breakout or keynote is going to be about. Here's kind of the main ideas. Like you would have like massaged that and fleshed that out with them ahead of time. And again, that's not going to be something that is like a brand new talk. Hey, here's this rough concept that I'm kind of thinking about. No, you're going to hear from the event planner, learning more about the event, about the audience. Okay, cool. Now let me take my seafood pasta that I've made dozens and dozens of times. I know what this is. And now let me put it into what you're looking for and kind of, hey, here's kind of what I'm thinking. I think this would be a good fit. You mentioned this. Here's how I think this would work. And so you're kind of connecting the dots to what they already shared.
And can it be as simple as finding the right title at a company? Would it be an HR person? Is it the VP of sales and just reaching out and saying, hey, are you hiring speakers, or seeing at a conference and is finding the right person and delivering that pitch?
Yeah. So as far as like the decision maker, it certainly depends, and it depends a lot on the context and who, on like what the event is, what you speak on. So let's talk through a couple of different examples. There's a variety of different industries. So there's corporations, associations, faith-based, nonprofits, government, college and university, and then education. So those are kind of the 7 primary industries that exist. And within that, there's a whole bunch of different subcategories. Okay. So in your case, Wes, let's say that you're doing some sales training. So you may be reaching out to some type of corporation, and you would probably reach out to, let's say, like the VP of sales or the head of sales, and asking them what the key thing that you want to ask them is if they bring in any outside speakers for their events or anything like that. Now, what you ideally want to know is if they have some specific event or conference that they have coming up. Okay. You want to, whenever it comes to like a timeline of when you reach out, you want to reach out further out than closer in. I would rather reach out an event planner tell me, we don't start reviewing speakers for 2 months versus, oh, we just booked our speaker last week. I was like, crap. So I'd rather reach out too far out than too close in. Most events, the bigger the event, the further out they're going to book. The smaller the event, the closer in they're going to book. We have seen, thanks to the pandemic, that timeline has shrunk considerably, where it's not uncommon for speakers to get booked for something that's a month out, which is a really, really small window for event planners. But sometimes they're going to like wait, see how the budgets play out, see how, just the world or the economy and all the unknowns that exist play out. Okay, we're going to do an event next month. Great. I got to find a speaker. So normally I'd recommend reaching out 3 to 6 months out. Again, the bigger the event, further out, a smaller event, maybe closer in, but that gives you some type of timeline. Now, again, who the person that you're going to reach out to, again, is going to largely depend on their role within the event. So it could be an event planner. It could be, if it's an association, it's probably going to be like the executive director or whoever the top person is. If you are speaking at a college, for example, a college is a collection of a lot of different individual groups. Okay. So let's say you speak at, I live in Nashville. So there's the University of Tennessee, which has, I don't know, probably 30, 40,000 students. There's not one person who just books speakers for 30, 40,000 students to get together. There's a lot of departments that book speakers. So it could be a Greek life, fraternities and sororities. It could be extracurricular. It could be student government. It could be student activities. It could be freshman orientation. It could be a certain department related to health or financial aid. Again, it all depends on who, within the subset of students that you'd be speaking to at a school, who's probably overseeing that department. Like that's who you want to start with. If it's a high school, you're probably going to start with the principal or the assistant principal. So again, in any context, it's going to be slightly different depending on the nature of the event that you're trying to get booked for.
Yeah. How do you know when to use multimedia versus just speaking?
Yeah.
Do I need a fancy slide deck?
No, you don't, is the short answer. So what I've always said, I've done hundreds and hundreds of paid presentations before, and I rarely, if ever, will use slides. And so the reason is that I think that it's really easy for speakers to over-index on slides. And the good litmus test is 5 minutes before you're about to speak, the slides don't work. The technology breaks down, the computer doesn't work, the projector falls apart, something's smoking and nothing's working. Okay. That can happen and does happen. In that situation, are you still ready to go? And if a speaker's like, oh man, here's an example. Remember a few years ago, my wife was at a conference and she texted me and she said, hey, I'm sitting in a session. It was supposed to start a few minutes ago. The speaker slides aren't working. And they said they cannot speak without their slides. In which case you shouldn't be speaking. You shouldn't be up there. So if 5 minutes before you're about to go on, slides don't work, can the talk still stand on its own? If it can't, then you're not ready. Okay. So the way I like to think about it is slides should be an enhancement, not a replacement for your talk. An enhancement, not a replacement for your talk. So if I'm telling, here's an example. There's a friend of mine who tells a story from stage about their daughter was born incredibly premature and had all types of health complications. And so it's one thing for her to share this story, but then she shows a picture of her little daughter, this tiny, tiny couple pound baby, just in like one hand, all these tubes and wires and cables hooked up to her. It's like, holy crap. Like that's way more powerful than her describing it. Right.
Sure.
But if it's like, it's one thing to use pictures and images. It's another thing to just use a lot of bullet points and just kind of using your slides as a script for you to kind of keep your place. Like I'm not a big fan of that. So again, slides are great, but they should be an enhancement, not a replacement for your talk.
Yeah, I gave a talk in Jacksonville, man, a few years ago before COVID, and it was a golf theme with this annual conference. And I arranged, because I was standing between them and golf. Right. So they kicked off the morning.
Right.
And then, it might have even been a luncheon, and I'm speaking during lunch, and then they head out to golf. So I'm like, I gotta be entertaining, and because these guys, they're ready to go drink and golf, right?
Yep.
And they're probably already starting drinking.
Yep.
And I arranged for one of the guys who gave me his golf club. So I had him up on stage, and the slides weren't working, and so I just started and using the props and whatever. And I got more good feedback from that, because they eventually got them working, and I used them and just skipped ahead. But I got more good feedback that, I didn't get rattled, and, was able to connect with them. And, the old adage, I mean, it's true, like, never let them see you sweat.
Yeah.
Right. And I put a lot of time into the slides, but it was my main talk. And I just adapted it for golf. I made it relevant, but it was still my core talk. So I knew that talk well, and I know golf, right? So, I mean, it was just so easy, to not reinvent yourself. So it's, I know we can get bored, but it's like that. I heard a guy tell me years ago, when you get bored, that's when the breakthroughs happen.
Mm.
I had to think about it, right? And it was like, if you're not when you're frantic and amped up and worried, how is this going to work? And you complicate things, you're not thinking of like new ideas. You're just so worried about the present, right? Just trying to survive. But when you can kind of relax, you can kind of daydream, and boom, a new idea will hit you. So we got to kind of balance that boredom with trying something new.
Yeah.
So that's cool, man.
One thing to piggyback on that is, as a speaker, it's important to remember that the audience takes their cues from you. And so in that situation, if you're calm, they stay calm. So in the, let's say something goes wrong in the room, a fire alarm goes off, someone's cell phone goes off, someone sneezes or coughs in like a weird, awkward way, or something's happening in the room that's a distraction. If it's not a big deal to you, it's not a big deal to the audience. But if you feel uncomfortable and you are visibly like rattled, it makes the whole audience feel uncomfortable. So I think one of the best things you can do is, again, stay calm in those situations and be a professional.
Cool. So you've got another engagement, but I want to make sure we get this out. So it's thespeakerlab.com. I'm on your site now. You got the Get Started there. You got your own podcast, lots of resources, and beginners or experienced, right? Send them your way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you give us a lot of bourbon and beer when we come visit.
Something like that. Give or take.
I think I saw that on the fine print. It was really small though.
Pretty small. Real small.
I can't find it right now. All right. But I screenshotted it, I think.
Perfect. Good to know.
Cool, man. So, I love what you're doing. I need to speak more. So I had a vested interest in having you on. So thanks for coming back. And I'm glad you made it through the COVID. And hell, man, if you can make it through that, you can make it through anything, huh?
This is true. Yeah, man, I appreciate you letting me hang out with you. Hey, one other thing I'll mention is we do have another a book called The Successful Speaker: 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, Building Your Platform. So it walks through the 5-step formula that we teach our students on how do you find and book gigs. So several pieces that we've touched on, talked about today. But if you want to go deeper on that, I believe we actually have a free option on that, and you just pay a couple bucks for shipping. Go to the Speaker Lab. You can find a link for the book and get your free copy.
Is that on resources? I'll make sure and grab the link.
We'll find it.
I'll plug it in there.
I'll have to double check.
Okay. And should they buy it from your site or Amazon or what?
I mean, you can get it from Amazon if you want, but yeah, I can also get you a link for.
They need to get it from you, man. I'm plugging you, baby.
How I'll find the link where we can get it for free for you.
Nice, free's good. All right, man. Grant Baldwin, all the way from Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for coming back on the show, man. It's been great having you.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Where's my damn stop?